tonight's meeting, 12-12-12 of the Creeks Restoration and Water Quality Improvement Citizens Advisory Committee meeting. Jen, would you please take roll call for us?
Mr. Moldaver?
Here.
Mr. Bullock?
Present.
Mr. Smith? Leanne French? Ms. Lomas? Here. Ms. Weber? Here. Mr. McIntosh? Mr. Jordan? Miss Alley? Here.
And could we note for the record that our council liaison, Councilman Hotchkiss, is also here?
All right, so we're on a little bit of a press schedule tonight, so let's jump right into it. Everyone's seen you have approved the minutes from the last meeting. If everyone has any questions.
Move to accept the draft minutes as submitted.
Can I get a second on that? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Okay.
Any adjustments to the agenda tonight, Cameron?
No.
Any members of the public here would like to speak? All right. Shoot. Go ahead. Do you want to give that to Jan, actually?
It is now. Thank you very much. I'll start again for the record. Brian Troutwine with the Environmental Defense Center. EDC is a 35-year-old nonprofit public interest environmental law firm working to protect clean water and open space and wildlife habitat in the Tri-Counties. We come to you tonight with our friends at the Santa Barbara Urban Creeks Council to request assistance and cooperation on a fish passage project in the Mission Creek watershed. The Tri-County Fish Team is an organization that's been meeting for over a decade and met recently to discuss implementing the Steelhead Recovery Plan in the Santa Barbara area. And we had a subgroup meeting at the EDC about a month or two ago, and Rick Frickman, who will speak next from the Urban Creeks Council, got inspired by that, and he went out and did some surveys of Mission Creek and Rattlesnake Creek, where he lives, right along the beautiful creek's banks. And he mapped barriers to steelhead migration, and he talked to landowners. Subsequent to that, Rick and I went out with George Johnson from your staff and with two fish passage engineers from HDR Engineering. And we've talked with the California Department of Fish and Game. They consider it an important project and believe that it can probably be tackled with a California Conservation crew, a California Conservation Corps crew. So EDC and Urban Creeks Council are here to offer our assistance, to state that we want to partner with you, the city, with our partners at the California Conservation Corps, with Fish and Game, with other partners, the Urban Creeks Council, to remove a barrier to steelhead migration. And the barrier that we're talking about is the next one upstream in the series of projects we've been working on for so many years now. It's a water pipe. It was actually part of the city's old historic water supply system. It's about almost a 3-foot diameter, 2.5-foot diameter pipe that forms an impediment across the creek, Rattlesnake Creek, just upstream from the confluence with Mission Creek. So we're here to seek city support and cooperation, and specifically we'd really like the City Creeks Division to work with us to coordinate with other city departments and agencies, community development for instance, as needed to facilitate perhaps the city making this easier for us by waiving any fees associated with permits. We'd also like to ask the city, if appropriate and feasible, to assist us in the CEQA process for this project. Now, in looking at it and talking with Fish and Game, we think that a categorical exemption may be appropriate, and we're hoping that the city will be able to help with the CEQA process, maybe implement the CEQA process and effectuate the proper CEQA document, whether it's an exemption or something else. So those are two of our requests for the city, and I'll just close by concluding, we're here to present our suggestion that we work together, we cooperate on restoring Mission Creek and its steelhead population, and we're here to seek the city's assistance to that end.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I know Mr. Troutwine knows that we can't take action on suggestions under public comment, And given the holiday period, do you think that you and your allies in the Urban Creeks Council would mind if we scheduled this for a more extensive hearing at our February meeting?
We'd be very pleased if you would accommodate that discussion later. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. But can we note in the record that the representative of the Urban Creeks Council was here that presents and defer this time?
All right, thank you. Moving on to the next, let's jump to item number 8, business items. And 8B will have Dr. Murray present her findings on the water quality research.
Well, hi, everyone. I hope you read your report, so just in case my slides don't come up, you'll know exactly what I'm referring to. So I'm going to go over, I'll do a little bit of background, and we finished our annual water quality monitoring report. It was an abbreviated report this year because, as you all approved or concurred with our staff recommendation, last time I was here, we postponed some of the work that was in the FY12 research and monitoring plan in order to focus on completing our source tracking project. So I'm going to go over some of the monitoring results really briefly, but I mostly want to take this opportunity to explain what we really did for that entire project, because I feel like we've never given you all enough of that time and information before. So our monitoring program is, we have our goals to quantify how much pollution and what types of pollution we find in the creeks or might be getting to the beaches. Once we know the concentrations of the different compounds or microbes, then relate those to what would be harmful to aquatic organisms or people swimming, recreating. We're always interested in evaluating our projects and collecting data for future projects. Finding the ultimate sources of pollution if we can, and that's what our source tracking project was about, and identifying long-term trends. And we're always doing this to try to prioritize future projects, understand what's working, communicate with the public about what they can expect when they use our waters. And the program's very question-driven, and so we have it organized, and if you look through any of our reports, it's always organized around these different elements, but most importantly, each element has several research questions, and every single sample that we collect is based around answering one of those questions. Not that we can answer them all every year, but that we're always trying to build up our knowledge base to answer them. And I just want to point out that that's a really effective way to influence, as committee members or the community members, to influence our monitoring program, because we've definitely taken questions from different water quality groups and committee members and built them into our program, and then we can usually figure out which samples of what types to collect and when and where. But they're always interested in hearing more questions. Really briefly, because you have heard about this, some of this before, just a few key results. In our storm monitoring the last few years, we've pretty much confirmed that we have very few high pollutant levels in our creeks during storms. We have found a certain class of pesticide called pyrethroids, which are a newer class of pesticides, and we are concerned about finding those in stormwater. But very little toxicity in water that we test that's coming from the creek during a storm. Laguna Channel is an occasional outlier there. But when we test the water in storm drains and straight out of the gutter during a storm, we do have sometimes high toxicity. and we do identify more pesticides and higher concentrations of metals, oil and grease. We're still trying to address this listing of Mission Creek as impaired for unknown toxicity. It continues to be, it hasn't yet been delisted, although I think the Water Board wants, the Regional Board wants to delist it. We would like to see it delisted, but some additional testing using an algae species, when the Water Board tested it, came back to show some toxicity. When we tested it, we didn't find toxicity, and we tested it many more times and places than the Water Board did. So we're working together to give them that data. Also, Sycamore Creek was listed for sodium and chloride, and it was listed because Sycamore Creek has an associated use of agriculture. The salinity isn't that much higher than Arroyo Burro or Mission Creek, but neither of those creeks is listed as having a beneficial use of agriculture. And so the question we're trying to answer is, yes, we know that there are some very high conductivity water in Sycamore Creek. Was it coming from purely natural sources? It's water upwelling through sediments that have, they're marine deposits, so they have a lot of salts in them. Or are there any releases of like water softeners, for example? And we're pretty close to saying it looks like it's all natural sources, but I'd like to do a little bit more work. And if the Water Board sees that, the Water Board can delist a creek if they believe that the source is natural, even if it doesn't meet certain criteria. So it's our source tracking development project that I wanted to focus on. This was a project that was conducted over several years. It was funded by the Prop 50 Clean Beaches Initiative grant program, and the entire project, from the proposal development, all of the field, most of the field work and almost all of the laboratory work was done with UCSB. And it was based on previous work where they had found some DNA-based markers for human waste coming out of some storm drains, and we did not have the tools, and we couldn't find the tools in the literature to try to figure out where those sources were in our storm drain network. There were several guides available to microbial source tracking, but they all really focused on the microbial end, meaning these newer DNA tools that you could use to decide whether the microbes present were from human waste or animal waste or growing in the environment. But there was really very little information on what to do once you had those results. So that during the early part of that project, we developed and tested the methods and found 4 leaking sewer pipes, and those were fixed immediately. And once we had that kind of toolbox put together, we still had money left over in our grant, and so we got a no-cost extension to then take those tools and try to apply them systematically across the entire city. So that was finding target areas with GIS, and then going and either doing dye studies or camera testing on all of those areas that we could identify as potential targets. And we found only one additional leak and a few other suspicious areas. So in one way, I think we found almost everything there is that can be found. I know we still do have some, we still have some results that have not been explained by what we've repaired. So we're hoping that as wastewater goes forward and repairs a bunch of pipes, that we'll then be able to test down the line and find that that signal has been eliminated. And so we've finished, the grant is completely finished, and we finished the reports, which was UCSB's really highly technical report, our final grant report. But most importantly, we promised when we applied for the grant that we would produce something that was useful for other coastal communities. And so I kind of went back and forth on how to rewrite the UCSB material more accessibly, and what I finally decided was what was missing for me was something really short with just concrete examples of which tools worked. A picture tells 1,000 words for me. If I could see someone using some of these tools and see how it worked, then we were more inclined to say, let's try this here. And so we've started to, it's 16 pages. I think of it as like a glossy advertisement for these kinds of tools. And we've handed it out in a couple of small conference seminar events, and it's on our website, and we've distributed on some listservs for people that work in this field and gotten really good feedback, and definitely seemed to fill some gap that was out there. It doesn't have all the details, but throughout it's linked to UCSB's report that has more details in it. So I'm just going to go through and pull out something from almost every page in the report, just so you have a sense of what that's like and what we're communicating about what we did. So what we did that was unique was we took a bunch of tools that were used by the microbial people, a bunch of tools that were used by wastewater groups, like televising sewer lines, but we used those tools in storm drains, the canine scent tracking, which you've heard about before, and then some newer tools, some newer ways of using DI and GIS, and we put those together and realized that you really do have to use at least 2 or 3 of those to find any one leaking sewer pipe. But really, the goal for the report is to provide an overview of these tools and show where they've been used successfully. The ultimate driver is, of course, beach water quality. We know a lot of communities in California have the high numbers of beach warnings that are based on indicator bacteria, but we kind of left the indicator bacteria aside on this project and said, let's just go after the human waste. And so we say that in this report. And I think that was a really good move, and the Creeks Advisory Committee supported that way back when, and I really appreciate that, because now new EPA guidance that just came out a couple weeks ago is also supporting that focus on the more risky sources of bacteria reaching beaches and human waste, untreated human waste. Now we have enough information, and it's just been in the last 10 years or so, 5 years even, to say, yes, untreated human waste is much worse than seagull waste, for example, causing indicator bacteria counts to be high when it comes to causing illness in swimmers. So, thinking about how does human waste enter creeks? Well, there's all the visible sources. These are pretty sporadic in our town, I think, from the experience that we've generated so far. We've got people just going on the banks of the creeks. We've tried some signage to stop that. We've got homeless encampments right next to creeks, leaking RV tanks, and yeah, there's a couple of pictures of right into the creek there. But it's the invisible sources that we were after on this project. And so you could divide that into 2 ways. The direct connections, where a plumber might mistakenly put a sewer lateral into a storm drain because they don't have the advantage of seeing all these pipes dug up, or a sewer pipe leaking, and that leaking sewage then reaching a storm drain and getting into the storm drain. So the tools that we've put in this one document are various kinds of water testing. We've discussed how the fecal indicator bacteria tool is pretty insufficient, and that graph on the right is taken from a trade journal, Stormwater, and it's indicator bacteria counts of Enterococcus and fecal coliform, and this is in someone in the gutter in front of a residential house. And so they scraped that biofilm, really high counts of indicator bacteria. Those could have come from who knows where. They either had the rain washed away or the bacteria scraped it off. And within just a few days, those counts were back through the roof. There was no feces that reached that area. That was pure bacteria growing on that gutter surface. And so there's just more and more demonstration and really solid demonstration now, not just hand waving, that Enterococcus can be naturalized to grow on kelp, so can the E. coli. So then there's the human waste specific markers, which are proved to be really important. That's the DNA tools, where you're looking at bacteria that are unique to the human gut, and also chemicals that are like caffeine and cotinine, which is from metabolizing nicotine. And there's bacterial community approaches, which I won't go into here, and then also non-specific chemical markers like ammonia, which could come from environmental processes, but it's supporting evidence that you have a sewage problem. We put flow gauges and automated samplers into storm drains. The graph on the bottom shows that we had a peak every day, and then we could collect samples specifically at that peak of flow and see if that had higher or lower concentrations of different indicators. This is the use of the sanitary system tools, the cameraing. We've said many times, people say, well, we've cameraed all of our sanitary sewer lines. We don't have, there's not a problem. We say you can't see a leak out when the bottom of the pipe is wet. You have to put that camera in the storm drain and see if you have leaking. See if you have leaking in. Sorry, get excited about this. Oh, and then go through, okay. And so we had a lot of success with the camarine. We tried the smoke testing, which is used by the sanitary people to see if like a roof vent, a yard drain has been connected to the sanitary sewer line and they're getting too much rainwater. And what we tried to do was put the smoke in the storm drain and see if we could see it coming out of a roof vent that's connected to someone's toilet line. And it has been, we didn't have success with this. I think it's pretty hard to do in a very dense urban area, but here's some pictures from colleagues in Washington that used it very successfully. So you can see they put the smoke in the storm drain. You can see it coming out of the catch basin inlets, but then you can also see smoke coming out of the roof of a house. Bingo, that's a toilet connected to the storm drain. And that's the same with a school on the right, but you can't see it that well. We use the sewage sniffing dogs, which we've already talked about, but a neat development is that when the dogs were here, they met with, they became in contact with our associate planner, George Thompson's aunt, who has since trained a set of dogs, and so now there's a new team on the West Coast, and I think they'll be available for hire very soon. They've gone through several rounds of testing. We used GIS a lot to map out our results to try to see up the storm drain networks. But more importantly, we used the GIS to map out where we thought it would make sense to look for sewage that could be leaking from a sewer pipe and actually getting into a storm drain. There's probably sewage leaking in a lot of places where a sewer line is just going up through the dirt, but it kind of clogs itself up quickly and it probably doesn't cause any problem for groundwater or water quality. But if you have another pipe right near there, then that's when you can be getting the cross-contamination. So that helped us target where to look. And so on that map, all of the red dots are places where the sewer line was shallower than the storm drain and crossed right above it. So those are places we took cameras out and looked and planned dye testing and looked during our larger study. Here's the dye study, and I think this was a great contribution because it's pretty cheap and low, doesn't require that much staff time. You go put a field fluorometer in a storm drain and you can leave it for a couple weeks and put dye, which is pretty cheap, in different sewer manholes, and then go pull the probe out and look. And if you have any fluorescent signal, which is a mark of the dye, reaching the storm drain, you know there's some cross communication there. And so we did that throughout the city too. And here's an example of putting those tools to work. We had downstream of this point, we had several positive results from the DNA-based markers, and so we knew there was a problem upstream. We did the dye testing. The dye testing narrowed. Actually, that was the dye testing. So the dye testing narrowed it to a few block area of where we could be having this exchange. And so that helped us put the camera in a smaller geographic area. And so we put the camera in the storm drain, and throughout in this area, there's a lot of groundwater reaching the storm drain, and you could see it infiltrating. But in this one particular side drain, you could see it coming in through the roof. That does not look the same as all the other pipes. And then it was tested and dye tested, and that was sewage, and it was fixed very, very quickly. And here's another one on, excuse me, Creo Street, where we didn't have that many. We had 3 out of 4 tests came back negative for human waste, but the site just always smelled, had ammonia problems. So we just continued to look. And then one time the fire hydrant flushed a bunch of disgusting stuff into the creek, and that was seen. And so we said, we have to find this problem. So we put the camera in and eventually found this leaking roof of the storm drain, and that was a private lateral, 2 private laterals from businesses crossing over. And then we confirmed it by flushing water in those toilets coming out into the creek. And now that drain is bone dry in dry weather. So we finished up, I'm not going to go through all these, but kind of presenting what we've learned from this process, how to spread your resources and how to focus, and finish up with just saying our next steps are to finish carrying out our FY13 research plan, which we're in the middle of, and continue the reporting and come back and update you with those results.
Thank you for a great report, Dr. Murray. It's obvious a huge amount of work and research has gone into this. Have you been able to provide copies of the report summary to our council liaison, Mr. Hotchkiss, and to our chair, Mr. Bullock? Because I know during the course of the year, people in the business community and the tax community, and Mr. Hotchkiss, of course, through the League of Cities in California, are inquiring, like, well, what are we actually doing to clean up the creeks and the beaches? And there's obviously a lot of detail here about it. It's not just doing, pretty stuff on the outside. There's some tangible work going on, to make the beaches and the sand and the creek banks cleaner. And I know when Paul goes to the Lodging and Restaurant Association, I'm sure he gets the same questions. So I hope you've provided, the bound copies to our two key representatives here. And then also I was wondering, when you refer to our partners at UCSB, are any of those related to Dr. Trish Olden and her team?
Thanks, Mr. Moldiver. I have not provided hard copies. I would be happy to.
You mean not yet?
Not yet.
Okay,
I
thank
will.
you.
Yes, I should have, and I'm very sorry. This is all with Dr. Holden, my esteemed colleague at UCSB. She's been an amazing partner throughout all of this.
Okay, so I want to thank you and commend you for the huge amount of detailed work and testing through various parts of the city family that you've been supervising and tabulating, because obviously there's a lot of very refined work going on here.
Thank you. And I, also, Mr. Jordan, will pass that report on to you. I could also take one extra minute and say I was just fortunate enough to attend a State of the Science workshop down at the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project. It was State of the Science for what we know about beach water quality, what we know about how well the tools work, how well we can tell human versus non-human sources, how much riskier human is compared to non-human, and what are some of the different regulatory tools. And I would be happy if anyone wants to contact me and have a debrief of that. I felt really fortunate to hear there was a lot of consensus, a lot of progress in the last few years. Just contact me, please.
Thank you, Dr. Murray. That was really good to see research actually coming through and making changes for the positive. Very nice.
Thank you.
Anyone have any other questions for the doctor? No? All right. Well, thank you very much.
And best wishes for a happy holiday.
Yeah.
Oh, and you too, of course.
So why don't we take you want to finish? Okay. All right. Moving on to the next item is the item number 7. You want to do that one, Cameron?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We're taking things a little bit out of order because we were trying to hurry. This room was double booked tonight, so there's a meeting coming in about 5 minutes. So we've got 2 short items here, and I think we'll be able to get through them. So item number 7 is subcommittee appointments. These are made by the chair each year for the committees or the subcommittees that we have for the Creeks Advisory Committee. In the current year, we have had Budget Subcommittee, which is a standing subcommittee, and we've had a Watershed Subcommittee. And the purpose of the Watershed Subcommittee was that it was set up to work on the General Plan Update. And the General Plan Update has now been completed with the City Council action to adopt the update. And so I'm recommending that we continue in the next year with our Budget Subcommittee, that we dissolve our Watershed Subcommittee, and that we create a temporary subcommittee for outreach and education. And the purpose for the Outreach and Education Subcommittee is to participate with Creeks Division staff as we prepare to go back out into the field with a public opinion survey involving water quality. This is a water quality public opinion survey that's required by our stormwater management program, our Clean Water Act permit, and we do this about every 5 years. And in the past, it's been helpful to have members of this committee participate as we develop questions that are going out in the poll, and people can have specific expertise in that kind of work or not and participate in this. It is, if you haven't done something like this, it's a very interesting process to learn about the science of public opinion surveys and how to not get the answers you want, but the answers that actually reflect what the public is, where the public is, and what the understanding is of water quality problems. So, so with that, Mr. Chair, the appointments are up to you, and you might want to find out if you have people interested in either of those committees, and take action on what the committee would like to do.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I would concur with the staff recommendation to suspend the Watersheds Committee, and I would like to bring forward for your consideration the concept of the chair contacting a committee member, French, whose expertise in outreach, marketing, and communication is superior, bar none. And I saw a demonstration of her expertise at lunch today at a different venue, and I think she'd be a real asset to the new subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Moldaver. Mr. Benson, what's the time commitment on the outreach subcommittee?
I suspect with that subcommittee we'll probably meet 3 times between now and June, or between January 1st and June. With the budget subcommittee, it's about the same. We'll probably have 2 or 3 meetings. In the past, with regard to the budget subcommittee, we've usually had people that are in sort of executive positions on this committee serve as members of the budget subcommittee, mostly because of their longevity and familiarity with the Creeks Division budget and history. And so in the past, we've always had the immediate past president and or past chair, the chair, and the vice chair serve as members of that committee. It doesn't have to be that way. That's the way we've set that up before.
All right. Well, let's keep the budget committee the same as it is at the moment. Is that okay with you? All right. And anyone would like to volunteer for the outreach?
Is there an opportunity to speak with you, Mr. Benson, or your staff about the obligations there, and whether I can participate by phones and things like that? As you can see, I'm having difficulty getting into town from campus in a timely fashion, and would want to make sure I could contribute in a meaningful way.
Yes, we can be somewhat flexible with our schedule, and we can absolutely accommodate phone meetings for something like that. It's really something that you don't need to be there in person. You'll get some materials and kind of look over them and provide input on the phone. It'd be great.
If the attendance by phone is an option, then yes, absolutely. I also don't want to overextend myself. So.
Okay.
I kind of mirror the phone comment that, yeah, if we can do that, that would be very doable.
All right. So the 3 of you then, if that's going to work out by phone, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chair, and the last item we have is item 8B, excuse me, 8A, and that is each year we propose a meeting schedule for the upcoming year for regularly scheduled committee meetings, and we included that with your packet. Like this year, we've tried to keep a consistent date of the 3rd Wednesday, 5:30 p.m. As you can see, sometimes we're in the council chambers, sometimes we're here. This is our normal meeting room. It's just not available every time. And the 2 exceptions to that are November and December, which we've moved the meeting up to the 2nd Wednesday because of the holidays. So that's it, and that would be for action also.
Move to concur.
Second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. All right, then with that, we will adjourn.
You need to.
Can I get a motion to adjourn, please?
Move to adjourn with the provision that we wish For all our
everyone
friends,
happy
safe and
holidays.
happy holidays until we meet again.
Thank you. Thank you. See you all next year.